Well, hello, YouTube and TikTok. Welcome to our live stream. I'm Gerhard Elfers in Berlin.
And I'm Brent Goff.
And today we are diving into a major courtroom showdown that could reshape the way social media giants will have to operate in the future. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, and YouTube, which is owned by Google, just suffered a major defeat in a jury trial over the addictive design of their platforms.
That's right. A 20-year-old plaintiff who is known as Kaylee convinced jurors in Los Angeles that these companies built their apps to keep users hooked without properly warning them about the risks. Now, the jury awarded $6 million in damages. Both Meta and Google say, of course, they plan to appeal.
But here's the kicker. This case could open the floodgates for hundreds of similar lawsuits. And all of this comes just one day after another jury in New Mexico ordered Meta to pay $375 million in a separate case about failing to protect young users. Meanwhile, governments around the world are discussing social media bans for kids under the age of 16. Does this mark the beginning of a legal reckoning for social media companies? So today we're breaking down what happened and what it means for big tech.
Yeah, and also what it means for you. We want you to put your comments, your thoughts, and your questions to us. We will try to get answers from our guests.
And we'll be talking to a legal expert, a psychologist, but we begin with the political side. Let's bring in Dr. Belinda Barnet. She's a senior lecturer at Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. Dr. Barnet, we know it's late in Melbourne and appreciate you staying up to join us very much. Dr. Barnet, let's start with this. Australia is the first country to ban children under 16 from accessing major social media platforms. Does the jury's decision in the US in some way validate Australia's decision?
Absolutely. So I think we were really the first country to recognise in the form of legislation that social media has a harmful effect on kids. That's why we banned some of the apps for children.
Now, as we know, kids, they always find ways to get around the rules. Have you found that to be true after Australia's social media ban for kids?
Yeah, absolutely. So kids have found ways around the ban, but we were expecting that. So it's kind of part of the job description of being a teenager, really, that you will try and find ways to get around things. So we're not sure what the actual data is yet. We haven't seen that, and so we're really assessing it based on how it feels. And to me, it feels like some of the kids have had a barrier put in front of them in terms of accessing social media, but some of the kids are getting through.
Now, this lawsuit against Meta and YouTube puts the addictive design of social platforms in the spotlight. What does this verdict signal for the broader tech industry, you think?
Well, this particular case is interesting to me because it's really the first time that anyone tried to hold the platforms accountable for harm to their person. So Meta and Google are fending off lawsuits every day about content in particular, and people are wanting governments are wanting Meta to take responsibility for the content on their platforms in the same way that a publisher has to, right? So they're used to fending that off, and in America, in fact, they have the protection of Section 230 to enable them to do that. But this particular case is interesting because it really aimed at the product itself. It aimed at the design of the product itself. It didn't really care about the content, and it was successful. So that's what's really interesting and quite amazing to me. Perhaps this is the way forward in terms of mitigating the power and the potential harms of the platforms. We have to look at the design of the product.
Now, I'd like to remind users that please put your questions in the comment if you're watching us on YouTube or TikTok. It's right down here. But Dr. Barnet, Google has argued that YouTube shouldn't even be classified as a social media platform based on your understanding of platform behavior and user interaction. Does this argument hold water?
No, and it didn't hold water here either. They tried that here for the social media ban. They tried to say that they shouldn't fall under the law because they're not a social media platform. But they are a social media platform. I mean, you have subscribers and you have likes, and it's basically a popularity contest. So YouTube is not a social media platform in the same way that Instagram's not. Instagram might be a photo sharing platform with social media as an afterthought. And you could, I guess, argue that for YouTube. But the fact is it's a social media platform.
Now, the jury has found that features like infinite scroll contributed to harmful addictive behaviors. In your view, which design elements are the biggest culprits here in shaping compulsive online habits?
Well, infinite scroll's one of them. So that's the effect when you're looking at your phone, for example. If you're looking at TikTok and it never seems to end, you can't reach the end of the feed. And that makes you want to keep going. But there are other design elements that need to be changed that are addictive. And they're things like the little warnings that you've got likes, it's really late here, that you've got likes or comments or subscribers, and you have to go and open the app now, you've got a message. So it's the whole thing is designed to have your eyeballs stuck to the screen for a long period of time. Yeah.
Well, I freely admit that this does not only apply to children. I know what you're talking about there. Now, but Meta says it's quite confident in its measures to protect children. Let's briefly listen in to what Meta's lawyer said after the verdict. It's coming.
We respectfully disagree with the verdict and will appeal. Teen mental health is profoundly complex and cannot be linked to a single app. We will continue to defend ourselves vigorously as every case is different, and we remain confident in our record of protecting teens online.
So they're confident of their record of protecting teens online. Dr. Barnet, what does current research actually tell us about the long-term mental health impact on social media platforms like Facebook on children and teens?
Well, there's a strong association between poor mental health with younger kids and social media use. So this kind of research was behind really, or part of the reason why we have a social media ban in the first place. I was going to say in response to Facebook there, they were very confident. They're also confident going into the court case that the lady wouldn't be able to prove that social media is addictive, but indeed they did.
Now, you have raised concerns about opaque platform practices. Do you think this verdict is enough and will force platforms to improve transparency and user protection?
I hope it does. So really, the companies have a choice here. They can either do nothing and be battered with more lawsuits, because there's a couple of thousand more in the pipeline waiting to go, and pay a lot of money, or they can fundamentally change the design of the platforms themselves. They can remove the addictive elements, for example, fundamentally redesign it. I mean, if they don't, what will happen is what's happened in Australia and is happening around the world, where governments will say, look, it's not safe. We're not going to let our kids use it, which doesn't seem like a very good business decision, really, does it?
Now, finally, what changes, whether regulatory, technological or cultural, do you believe are absolutely necessary to reduce the addictive potential there?
Well, getting rid of infinite scroll is a very good idea. I'd quite like some kind of time limit as well, so that if you, for example, have been on TikTok for 6 hours, that you just, the program doesn't let you do that. So some inbuilt features to prevent addictive behaviour, some inbuilt features to, well, moderation, safety mechanisms. There's a whole suite of things that could be done, many of which have been scaled back by the platforms. So Facebook, for example, has scaled back moderation in the last year or two. So there are many things they could do to make the platforms safer.
Let's see what they actually will do. Thank you very much, Dr. Belinda Barnet from Swinburne University of Technology in Melbourne, Australia. Many thanks.
Well, as we said, the U.S. jury ruled that Instagram and YouTube are intentionally engineered for addiction. Now, the plaintiff said that she began using YouTube when she was 6 and Instagram when she was 9. She said that led to anxiety, depression, body dysmorphia, and eventually suicidal thoughts. She was on social media, she said, 16 hours a day.
That's quite a lot. Joining us now is Christian Montag, Distinguished Professor of Cognitive. No guest. I'm just hearing that we don't have our next interview partner ready there. And I'm wondering whether we have our legal expert maybe already online. But I need to be told not that either. Yeah. Anything on the comments, Brad?
Nothing so far, nope.
But let's talk about our own addictions and social media.
If addictions scare hard.
Yeah, well, what we've just discussed, this doom scrolling, and you know, you know that you're being fed. If you're interested in one topic, you click on a video once, listen to it, and you get more and more and more and more. And I feel in my personal life that I spend more time on social media.
Well, I mean, as adults, obviously, we're responsible for what we do. As children, things obviously are different. But my question is, are we supposed to make the companies responsible for what children do? And what about the responsibility of the parents here? I mean, I know the parents were saying...
It's tough for parents, is it not? I'm not a parent, but I've discussed it. We've discussed it in the newsroom earlier today, that for parents, it is very hard to control. Your children not necessarily are supervised all the time. Even if you put blocks on the phones of the kids, friends might not have that. So I think it's incredibly hard on parents.
But what about what happens in the home, though? I mean, I know outside influences are one thing, but when you're home, what happens when parents use screens like an iPad as a babysitter? Then isn't the parent obviously responsible for what happens, what the consequences of that are? I mean, that was something that I felt like in this trial, it was almost demonized to say that the parents have a responsibility for what their children are doing. But at the end of the day,
it's true. I think with behavior, with your own behavior, you can, which is of course imitated by children. I think you can do quite a lot. But you are old enough to remember the discussions about television. When I was a kid, television was deemed a very, very negative factor in the raising of children. And I have spent, when I was in my early teens, I've spent hours and hours and hours, afternoons, in front of the television.
Well, you know, the European Commission recently ruled that TikTok is bad for children's health. One reason is because they said that there's this infinite scrolling, that it just pulls you in, and every 15 seconds there's a dopamine kick, if you will. So the wording that they used was that this can lead users to have a passive role in the interaction with social media. I was thinking about that. Isn't that what happens automatically when we watch television, though? We are passive consumers of whatever is being shown. Why is that acceptable, but with social media, it's considered hazardous to your health?
Well, social media might also have the effect, it can spur creativity, right? Kids might be pushed to sort of get creative, to paint stuff or record a dance video or whatever. Not all of it, I think, is bad. It's just the pure passive scrolling.
What about a subscription? What about if all social media platforms required a subscription in order to access the content? I mean, that would be somewhat of a barrier.
Subscription?
A paid, or let's say that you can have a free subscription, but you have to put your name in. Obviously, your age has to be verified, I would assume. But it forces you to at least take responsibility for being there. Would that be an acceptable barrier?
Possibly, I should think. And I'm just hearing that we have our next guest. And
Is that Professor Christian Montag?
I believe...
Yes.
I see him right there. There he is.
Yes,
There he is. Professor, it's good to have you on. Sorry about the technical difficulties there, but I'm glad we were able to fix that. Let me just get your reaction first to this decision by the jury in Los Angeles yesterday.
Can you hear us?
I hear you. Oh, I thought that you were starting to show a video or something.
No.
Okay, you want to
what did you think? What did you think when you heard
sorry,
about
I
it?
misunderstood.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I was on a plane back to Germany, so I just read it very shortly this morning. But first of all, I think it's a good sign that we see that finally something is done against the platform design, because I think the case, which was won now against the industry, will hopefully lead to the design of more healthy social media platforms.
Well, what would that design look like, Professor?
That's a fantastic question. We have at the moment a big problem to actually answer this in the correct way, because we live in the so-called age of the API calypse. So the application programming interfaces are closed. And these are, if you want, the doors which we need to open to be able to study on the platforms human behavior. So in a way, we guess what kind of design elements are doing what. And of course, we have a lot of psychological theory behind it. To explain this, for example, we know that the like button works via social comparison on the one hand, but in itself, it is also social reward, which brings people back to the platform. We know that push notifications can trigger fear of missing out, a negative emotion. And if you feel it, you go back to the platform to reduce your fear of missing out. We know that endless scrolling, of course, leads to prolonging of online time. Or we all know, for example, in the messengers, the red recept function, these double blue ticks, which operate via social pressure for some people, in order to respond more quickly. So we have a lot of theory behind how these design elements are operating, but the exact assessment on human behavior for us is exactly difficult, because these APIs are closed at the moment.
Well, I mean, I think we would all agree that using social media can give us a kick over and over again, like a dopamine rush. And I guess you could say it puts our brain on autopilot. Is this, would you say, our fate once we start with things like infinite scrolling? I mean, are we doomed by dopamine?
Well, first of all, I mean, the dopamine hypothesis is one which is, of course, in a way logic and easy to follow. But let me just say this as a brain scientist, it is very difficult for us to actually prove this, because with the usual brain imaging techniques, let's say, for example, MRI, we can see that, for example, the reward circuit of the brain is lighting up if we are receiving likes, and we know that dopamine plays a role there. But we also know that other neurotransmitters or neuropeptides also play a role there. So really to pinpoint this to dopamine is not easy, because we cannot simply open up the brain while people are using social media, obviously due to ethical reasons. This said, the industry works with a surveillance capitalism mentality. That's a term which has been brought up by Shoshana Zuboff, which means that we allow the industry, when we onboard, to spy on our behavior. And why do they do this? Because via all the digital footprints we leave there, they want to understand how our psychological profiles are, to present us with personalized ads. And for this business case, it's important to prolong online time.
Yeah.
And this is done via A/B testing. Yeah, that's the critical word, A/B testing. The industry tested over many, many years what design constellations work extremely well in terms of prolonging online time, in prolonging the engagement or fostering engagement with the platforms. And this led, of course, to very immersive platforms where we use them basically when we just see we are alone with each other, and then we already have the phone in the hand.
Well, Professor, what about then limiting easy access to social media? I mean, do you think that platforms, should they introduce, we were talking about this earlier, a subscription plan? I mean, would that be acceptable? Would that be an acceptable barrier in the name of protecting users' mental health?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So I deeply believe that if we want to see more healthy platforms, first of all, we have to get rid of the data business model as we see it at the moment. That is really critical. And if this would mean a redesign of the platforms, and this would need to be financed, of course, in a different way, because we are not the product anymore with our data, but we would need then to pay for more healthy platforms. This could be social media as a public good or something else. And this necessarily would operate via a subscription fee or something else. And we see in our data, we did studies on this, that roughly 50% of the people would not like to see this. So I think in this area, we really have to educate people that a healthy social media product cannot be for free.
Okay, Gerhard, you've got something.
Yeah,
don't you?
Professor, we have a viewer question here for you from YouTube viewer Leonidas. And he asked, what about apps or platforms that are educational as well as addictive?
Yeah, that is also a fantastic question. So we are, I think, here in this field of talking about serious games. I mean, we have a gamification of many online platforms in the meanwhile. The learning platforms are more and more dominated by design elements, aiming, of course, to give positive feedback if you learn something. That in itself, if of course, not something which is just problematic to see. But we all know also from our past that learning is not always fun, not always something which is great, and which sometimes goes along with frustrations. And therefore, I think that also the younger people, when you go to school or later to university, you have to learn that lifelong learning is also something which is sometimes frustrating. And in building everywhere some reward mechanisms is something I don't think is too good.
Professor, if we could, we want to take a listen now to what a parent said yesterday after that verdict was announced in Los Angeles. Take a listen.
Stop blaming the parents. It's on you. And this is what this is showing today. And for parents, we now know that they were manipulating our children for profits while we were watching and trying to keep our families safe.
Professor, let me get your reaction to that. Is there enough blame to go around? How responsible are parents here for their children's mental health?
So, first of all, the link between social media use and mental health issues is a complicated one. So I cannot dive too much into the cases which were at the US courts at the moment because I had too few time to read them. But in general, we see that the literature is complex because many factors matter or need to be taken into account if we talk about depression, for example, or other psychopathologies. Genetics play a role. Pressure plays a role, of course, and social media could also play a role, but it will not be a monocausal factor. And of course, parenting also plays a role. I mean, if parents the whole day just watch at their phones, we know this from social learning theory, and it's pretty clear that the young people are imitating this behavior. So therefore, I think the role of teachers, of parents in being good in terms of also using this technology not too much, I think is really important.
Professor, you know, we were talking earlier about how it is in our families. I mean, in my family, there's a no screen policy for the children. the goal there, of course, is to keep them off social media as long as possible, to keep them, I guess, mentally healthy as much as possible. In your opinion, is this what all parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, is this what they should be doing? Everything they can to minimize the exposure to screens as long as possible?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we have to take into account different age barriers. I think for the youngest in our society, this is really important to have as few screen time as possible. But there comes the age where also younger people will onboard on platforms. And I think in families, it's very important that we have certain areas where technology does not play an important role in terms of smartphones and social media apps. For us at home, for example, it's a dinner place where it's a no-go, where no technology is happening, where we just want to talk about family stuff and want to hear about what's happening, what was happening the whole day and so forth. This said, I think it's too easy to say that the younger ones should be regulated, because the younger ones often also want the parents to spend less time. So if we discuss these things in families, I think it's very important that both the kids can say, listen, mom, dad, I want you to reduce. And then also mom and dad can also say where they want to see that the kids reduce.
Let me ask you about here in Europe for a second. You got a question?
Yeah, it's not really a question, but
out.
before we go to the next question, I just would like to read a comment here that refers to what we've just discussed with the responsibility of the parents. Hazelite86 writes, if she's viewing us on TikTok, having teenagers myself, the outside world is a challenge. I'm watching other teenagers. They seem to have more issues with emotions than they did before. And Louis James says, social media knows it causes harm, but took advantage for profits. Yes, and then there is one that doesn't really refer to this.
But there is that perception there, right? That young people, young teenagers today, compared to previous generations, seem to have bigger challenges dealing with their own emotions. I mean, I know a lot of this is anecdotal, but does it make sense connecting this then to the use of social media?
Yeah, what's pretty clear is that we have seen a rise of psychopathologies in adolescents over the last years, but just pinpointing it in a monocausal way to technology, as I said, thought too easy. We know that psychopathologies are influenced by many factors. I discussed already the role of genetics, role of parenting, stress, and so forth. And within these many factors, it's a dynamic interplay, of course, with technology use.
What about what we're seeing right here in Europe? I know that the European Commission recently ruled that TikTok's design, which includes infinite scrolling and autoplay and this personalized feed, it said all of those together mean that TikTok is harmful to a user's mental health. And they said that the platform turns users into passive users. And I'll ask you, I mentioned this to Gerhard, isn't that what we are when we watch television, though? Aren't we passive users?
I think the difference with television is, of course, that we can participate in these platforms. Yes, on the one hand, we can do some passive browsing, but the truth is also that young minds can interact with others. And I would also say that the difference compared to TV is that the degree of immersion created by the platforms is larger than with the classic TV. So the pull, in other words, which is exerted from the platforms is larger than from classic TV shows as we have seen it in the past in our generations.
I want to ask you, too, about your situation. I know you live and work in China, and many of the social media platforms that we're talking about today, they're blocked in China, but we know that China has its own versions of social media. Again, this may be anecdotal, but is the situation for young people and children in China, is it different compared to what it is for children here in Europe or in the rest of the world?
Yeah, the platforms are regulated in different ways. So, for example, if we compare the Western TikTok to the Chinese TikTok, which is called Douyin, we see in terms of regulations for young users, very different platforms. For example, after, I'm not sure exactly, but I think it's 40 minutes or something, the endless scrolling stops. No further content is delivered. Or if you take a look at Douyin compared to TikTok, also more education content is delivered in the feeds. So I think in this way, the regulation attempt in China is quite interesting to come up to more healthy platforms in terms of protecting young minds from harm.
Professor Christian Montag, good to have you with us. I know you've been traveling and that you just landed, so we appreciate you taking the time to fit us in as well. We appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. All the best.
And we turn now to the legal side of this recent, or these two recent verdicts. And we talk to Professor Matthias Kettemann. He's a professor of Innovation Theory and Philosophy of Law at the University of Innsbruck in Austria. Professor, thanks for joining us here on our live stream. Now, you have called this verdict a warning shot for the entire industry. What do you mean?
Well, the companies have for too long just taken for granted that they can do whatever they want with young users. And states haven't done a good job in ensuring that children are protected online. So this is really the first time that companies are being shown that if you don't care about your young users and their rights enough, this is going to come back to you and you'll have to pay for what you've done.
Now, in legal terms, what immediate consequences does this verdict have for YouTube and Meta, which runs Instagram and Facebook?
Well, no immediate financial consequences. All of those cases, lawyers play a huge role, lawyers which are really good at their job, and so those cases are going to be retried at the next level. So we might see changes in the opinions in the next years on those cases. But it's more than that. It's really more of a sign that times are changing. And even if the fines, the penalties are being reduced a bit in the next line of cases, it's really important that we've seen this here, this double whammy, basically, against the platforms and against their carelessness with how they deal with young users.
Now, we come to that aspect a little bit later, but first I want to ask you that these verdicts, they don't mandate any specific changes to the design of social media platforms or to their algorithms that make them tick. Does that mean that Meta will not have to change its design or algorithm at all?
That's the big problem with the American legal system. You have very few rules on how those platforms can operate, but if they do something wrong, then a couple of years later, somebody might put them on trial, as has happened now. What we need are systemic changes to the design of platforms. Perhaps along the lines what your previous speaker mentioned is working well in China, like time limits, more educational content. All of that is nothing that judges can order in a particular case when it's about whether or not that particular person was negatively impacted by social media use. This is really something which the European approach does better, namely providing good rules for how designs should look like.
Now, these cases are now being described as potential precedents for hundreds of similar lawsuits, and you hinted on that. And you've also said that the Los Angeles ruling should not be mistaken for a final landmark judgment. But do you think we're at a tipping point here for platform accountability?
It sure does feel like that. It feels a bit like the Marlboro moment of tobacco legislation, when the first verdicts came in that said that tobacco companies had hidden some of the dangers which they knew about of their products from customers. Now, of course, obviously, social media isn't tobacco, isn't alcohol. There are lots of positive uses. That's also why it's so difficult to pinpoint exactly causalities, as your previous interviewer said. However, it does feel like there is something afoot in the European Union at the level of Congress, which is preparing a law limiting how young people can be, the data of young people, how it's treated online by US companies, and those two verdicts. I do have the feeling that we're turning the tanker towards more rights for young people.
Now, you just mentioned Europe. Does this verdict have any legal implications outside the US, or is it just sort of a guiding light?
It doesn't even have lots of implications at the moment in the US because they will be appealed. It does have an important impact insofar as US companies are obviously influenced by what's happening in the US, right? And since most of the practices that the courts in the US were critical of, things like infinite scrolling, things like not caring enough about what kind of content young people see, those things are already in Europe's rule books. Companies are obliged under the Digital Services Act to care about what kind of content they provide to children and how children interact with their products. They have to care about how vulnerable groups, including children, use their products. So yes, they're reminded about those duties by these rulings. Insofar, we have at least an effect, even though we're not quite sure yet how much of that we'll be seeing.
I think, Brent, you have one more question from one of our users.
This is on TikTok. A user, Theodore Caster 3, saying that I don't trust the government to implement anything but censorship. There are those, obviously, Professor, who think that that's where we're headed here, that eventually the legal system is going to put restrictions on social media, and that then will fuel movements in governments to ban or censor the information or the content that we do have access to.
This is really not a question about censorship. This is a question of making sure that the rights of all users are respected. It's not about censorship. If we remind platforms that they have to make sure that young people don't overuse the internet, it's not censorship if we tell platforms to make sure that young people don't see, decapitation videos and nudist and pornographic content. This is not censorship. This is an exercise of responsibility that states are obliged to do. They have to protect their citizens. They have to protect young people from big companies and their attempts to make money off of them.
Professor, let me just ask you this. This is also from a user on TikTok, just saying that the irony of watching this topic on TikTok is obvious. I mean, do you agree that there is an irony here, that this jury has ruled that platforms such as TikTok, that we are live streaming on right now, that we could be hazardous to the mental health of young people?
I don't particularly see the irony. It's like a newspaper reporting about the verdict, what kind of news the newspaper can feature. Media is constantly changing. The way we consume news is changing. It's great that young people are interested in news. It's fantastic that quality media like Deutsche Welle is using new tools to reach everybody. That's also part of the constitutional obligation, by the way, of the states to enable that people are informed. Deutsche Welle is an important part of that, and using social media as one of the more effective ways to reach a broad audience is constitutionally mandated, and not irony, but rather effective communication.
So it's not about the content then, is it? It's more about the way that content is presented to the user, right? But scrolling and, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not what we say, it's how we are presented.
It's how platforms choose to engage with users. It's how they choose to design their products. They have chosen in the past to design them in a way that makes people love to be online as long as they can. Adults are responsible for themselves to a large degree. Children aren't. And platforms have to make sure not to, as the rulings suggest, as the European law clearly states, have to make sure that they don't provide us with products that pose dangers to vulnerable groups, including children. It's about design choices that shouldn't only be made with a view to making more money.
It's good to hear that we don't need to feel bad about streaming on
You
YouTube
saved the day, Professor.
and TikTok. Thank you very much for explaining the legal side of all this to Professor Matthias Kettemann from the University of Innsbruck in Austria.
Austria, yeah.
Okay.
So that's going to wrap it up. We're almost at the end.
That's it, indeed. Have we learned something for our own social media use?
Well, I think what he said is true. I mean, we have a responsibility to inform, but it's not our responsibility of how it's packaged and designed and presented. That's up to the platforms. Yeah, it's a big difference.
Absolutely the case. Thank you very much for watching this live stream, and hope to see you soon on this very channel.
That's right. Thanks for joining us.